Hello. That's what Brandy said.
Yes, yes, no.
There you go.
I just saw that.
Will the Senate please come to order? Today, our devotional exercises will be conducted by the Reverend Peter Plake of Waterbury Congregational Church. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I've been reading a collection of poetry by mostly ancient Chinese nuns from a book called Daughters of Emptiness, Poems of Chinese Buddhist Nuns. The editor, Beata Grant, makes the rather pedestrian but poignant acknowledgement that while their poetry is an important contribution to world literature, the nuns themselves were mostly forgotten. She says, quote, "If the idea of men becoming monks and abandoning their familiar responsibilities was never fully accepted in Confucian China, the notion of women becoming nuns and failing to fulfill their procreative duties, or as the case may be, leaving the protective shelter of fathers, husbands, or sons, was looked upon with even less favor." The number of poems we have by Buddhist nuns is tiny, and they are but a dim shadow of a world we will never be able to recover. For the most part, Buddhism flourished in China since its arrival there in the first century, experiencing, as most religions do, some periods or eras of trouble. But nuns seem to face mostly trouble. For example, in the late 16th century, the Nanjing Board of Rites ordered all Buddhist nuns to return to their proper Confucian places. Why? Because, and I quote, "men and women are different. This is the norm of the ancients. As for nuns, within they lack a husband and family, above they lack a father and mother, below they lack descendants." Is this not pathetic? They call what they are doing religious cultivation, but in actuality they are transgressing the norms. And moreover, they also contaminate the wives and daughters of others. Is this not disgusting? No surprise then, much of the poetry in this collection reflects what I call religious grittiness. By that I mean a willingness to think critically about religious experience and to take that as the basis for their continuing sense of call. I mean by it a readiness to evaluate religious experience beyond traditional feelings of awe into an evaluation of it as sacred. Religious grittiness means a willingness to say what I experience may not be mountaintop awe, but I know it to be true, and I cannot ever act against it. Religious grittiness is a move away from popular religious piety or tradition toward what Buddhists call sincere diligence. Zhijing writes a poem I'll leave you with about the experience they've felt of suffering, or as they call it, samsara. To using this as an experience to rethink their religious devotion. I urge, she says, those of you who aspire to enlightenment. In aspiring to enlightenment, you must be diligent. If your mind is not completely sincere, you will wallow forever in the bitter sea. The great earth is vast and without limit, and sentient beings are too many to count. Yet how many people are there with the sense to leap out of the bitterness of samsara? Her poem, it seems to me, is a stunning reminder that religion is not primarily about feeling awe, but clarity of the mind in service to all of us, the common weal. It is, to paraphrase the now even more famous John Lewis, about cultivating good trouble, thoughtful trouble. So may it be for you.
Are there any announcements? We have Senate bills for introduction. S-140, an act related to implementing second look sentencing and compassionate release, introduced by Senator Vihovsky and others. Please listen to the first reading.
S-140,
an act relating to implementing second look sentencing and compassionate release.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill, and it is referred to the Committee on Judiciary. S-141, an act relating to prohibiting possession of firearms and dangerous weapons in state buildings, introduced by Senators White and Clarkson. Please listen to the first reading.
S-141, an act relating to prohibiting possession of firearms and dangerous weapons in state buildings.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill, and it is referred to the Committee on Judiciary. S-142, an act relating to pathway to license for internationally trained physicians and medical graduates, introduced by Senator Harrison and others. Please listen to the first reading.
S-142, an act relating to a pathway to licensure for internationally trained physicians and medical graduates.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill, and it is referred to the Committee on Health and Welfare. S-143, an act relating to expanding the membership and duties of the Advisory Council on Harassment, Hazing, and Bullying Prevention in Schools, introduced by Senator Baruth. Please listen to the first reading.
S-143, an act relating to expanding the membership and duties of the Advisory Council on Harassment, Hazing, and Bullying Prevention in Schools.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill, and it is referred to the Committee on Education. We now have a House bill for referral, H-494, an act relating to capital construction and state bonding, passed the House on March 28, 2025. Please listen to the first reading.
H-494, an act relating to capital construction and state bonding.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill, and it is referred to the Committee on Institutions. Orders of the day. We now have H-489, an act related to fiscal year 2025 budget adjustment. Are there any amendments before third reading? Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. If you'd like to follow along, I'm on page 6666 of today's calendar. This is I think most everybody here is familiar with the governor's executive order that went out last Friday regarding our GA program, or what we commonly refer to as the motel program. This amendment in today's calendar would establish a priority category of individuals that would be eligible to receive motel assistance between April 1st of this year and June 30th of this year. Those individuals would be prioritized over any other eligible people under the 80-day program, and the people in the priority list, if they needed motel services between now and January 30th of 2025, those visits would not count towards their 80 days. So who is on this priority list? I'll just go ahead and read them. The priority eligibility criteria means the household was housed in a hotel or motel room pursuant to this section on March 31st of 2025. Where applicable, the department has determined that there is sufficient medical evidence and documentation that a household member has a medical condition listed in these subdivisions of this subsection, to include the household has a member who meets one of the following: is a child 19 years of age or under, meets the Medicare definition of homebound as defined in the 42, the Code of Federal Regulations. I have that definition if anybody would like to hear it. Requires a life-saving device that requires access to electricity, is in active cancer treatment or treatment for severe kidney disease or renal disease, or has severe liver or heart conditions, is actively receiving Medicaid eligible or Medicare eligible home-based nursing services, or lastly, is in the third trimester of pregnancy or who will enter the third trimester of pregnancy between April 1st of this year and June 30th of this year. What this amendment attempts to do is to prevent or protect classes of very vulnerable people in the state of Vermont and to provide them priority. Right now, these people don't necessarily receive a hotel room. They can be bumped by people that are not in a priority class because we are limited to 1,100 outside of the winter season. And it provides, importantly, a bridge, a transition to wind down this motel program as it has existed since COVID and revert to our traditional system of winter rules and summer rules. And will allow us to turn our attention, our focus, and our resources towards programs that to prevent housing insecurity that are far more efficient and cost-effective than the motel program. And so I offer this amendment to improve the BAA and to move this bill as amended out of the Senate and get it to the House and eventually to the governor so we can put BAA behind us and move on to other more pressing matters. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. This morning I woke up and I said, it's a great day to be homeless, which it is not. We've been working on the homeless situation for a long time, and I'll say at the outset that your Committee on Health and Welfare did review this proposal of amendment, and we voted, we took a straw poll and do not support the proposal of amendment. You're wondering why is this amendment in health and welfare when 489 is an appropriations bill? And that's because the amendment itself has policy, but has no money. So we looked at this from the policy perspective, and I'd like to place it a little bit into context briefly. So some of us have been working on the homeless situation for a long time. The hotel motel program, as you know, started with the pandemic when people were losing their homes because of mortgage foreclosures, when they lost their jobs. Remember, we saw those lines of people going to get food? That's when this program started. It wasn't a friendly time. And I expect we're going to see it again based on what's happening in our capital, our national capital. Of course, we want the hotel motel program to end. We've been working on that for a long time and will continue to do that. In fact, your Health and Welfare Committee this morning looked at a House bill that is coming to us that will have significant changes made to our general assistant adverse weather program and to a bridge to a new way of looking at how to provide homes for those who don't have them. Well, Mr. President, just a brief thought and brief history about what we've been going through over the past 5 or 6 years regarding homelessness. We went back and I'm looking at some of the rules that have been passed by the administration on homelessness and access to more permanent places to live. As you know, the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules evaluates the rules that come to us after we pass legislation. There's clear legislative intent. We look at the rules that come to us. Chairs of committees read those rules and then make recommendations to LCAR, Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. So I went back and I tried to sort out all the rules that I've read recently on this issue. And we can go back, I'm not sure the first date, but it's probably around 2021. We had general assistance, emergency assistance rules. The rule was withdrawn. We had transitional housing program, emergency rules. Difficult to find out what happened to those rules, but they did. I don't think they persisted. We had, in 2022, we had an iteration of Transitional Housing Program Emergency Rules. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 different rules presented to us. Certified objection that requirements for application by the rule was contrary to legislative intent. So these rules were not meeting legislative intent, nor does the amendment before us. Then we had other pandemic era general assistance emergency housing transitional rules in 23. Wasn't approved nor objected to. Oh, finally, in 2023, we had 2 sets of rules, 4 sets of rules on emergency housing transition that were approved, but not the complete set of rules needed to move forward on housing for folks who do not have housing. Most recently, we've been through the process in the last spring, over the summer, into the fall, looking at general assistance, emergency housing assistance rules that were not approved, neither approval nor objection at several different meetings, but then a continuation to look at those rules ongoing, asking the administration to please come back with rules that would meet legislative intent. Finally, the rules were passed this winter. So some of those rules did meet our legislative intent. But, Mr. President, we have not finalized the work that we need to do on identifying housing for folks who are homeless. And as I said this morning to myself, this is not a great day to be homeless. So in looking at the proposal before us, I will say it sounds great, doesn't it, to be providing support for people who are homeless and having a list of those people included. But I will say that that list does not meet legislative intent from the law that we passed, Act 113, the big bill last year, nor does it meet legislative intent when we passed our legislation several years ago, nor does it meet legislative intent of H489. If you make a comparison with what was in Act 113, the big bill from last year, and look at some folks who are left out in the cold. We're leaving out people who have experienced the death of a spouse, domestic partner, or minor child that caused the household to lose its housing. Those people will not be included in the priority list. We're not including someone who's experienced a natural disaster, such as a flood, fire, or hurricane. They're not in the priority list. We're not including someone who's under a court-ordered eviction or constructive eviction due to circumstances over which the household has no control. They're not in the priority list. We're not including anyone who has experiencing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, hate violence, or other dangerous or life-threatening conditions that relate to violence against the individual or a household member that caused the household to lose its housing. They are not included in the priority list. In fact, the priority list gives the people on the attenuated, shortened priority list that we have in this proposal of amendment really will push people out who are currently in shelters, who are in housing, who haven't yet met their 80-day time frame. So people who still have time available to them to be housed will be pushed out by people on the priority list. It could be someone, right, who lost a child. It could be someone on this list that we have in Act 113. I find that, I don't know what word to use. I've heard from some of my colleagues the word mean, cruel, unusual punishment. I'm not sure. Now, last year, after Act 113 was in place, we had a report that came to us from the General Assistance Emergency Housing Task Force. I have it if anyone would like to look at it. But it offers significant recommendations about how to improve our general assistance housing and how to move forward in a transition away from the hotel motel program, which we are all so inclined to do and which we need to do. There's no question about it. But this proposal of amendment doesn't do that. This proposal of amendment puts a cap back on the number of people who can be helped. It limits the people who can be helped. And as one of the senators on my committee indicated today, that even, people who are in the first trimester of pregnancy sometimes have significant nausea and upset stomach, and they can't function properly. They will be put out. So, Mr. President, overall, there's a lot embedded in the work that we have gotten to in H489. I think the proposal that we have in 489, we've taken, the money's been found. The policy is important to us. The policy meets legislative intent. And a lot of conversation that we've had in our Senate Health and Welfare Committee, as well as other committees, I think we feel very strongly, we are a state of a strong sense of community and helping one another. This proposal of amendment just doesn't pursue that set of values that we have in this state. So that is my report from the committee, Mr. President.
Senator from Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I might inquire of the presenter of the amendment.
The presenter of the amendment is interrogated.
So I understood the senator to be saying that this amendment recapitulates the governor's emergency order. Is that right?
That's correct.
That being the case, I wonder, since the governor has already issued an executive order, what the rationale is for duplicating.
Well, it would just, it would prevent any disagreement down the road over the executive order, whether it was the intent of the legislature by putting it in statute, they would be in agreement and we could just move forward at that point.
Thank you. So understanding that this language originally came from the governor, the senator is now presenting it to us in the Senate. So I'd like to just question about the thinking. So I'm looking at the priority eligibility criteria, and I'm wondering what is the rationale or the thinking behind eliminating women who are pregnant but not in their third trimester?
I think it was, when the administration went through, they had a priority list, and this is the priority list. There are many other groups that they could have added. The senator from Chittenden, talked about the possibilities of some of those ads. Yourself, you talked about the possibility of some of those ads yesterday. But this is where they drew the line. It is admittedly a subjective line. Other groups could have been added. There may even be friendly amendments that we could add to this list, but this is where they landed.
Well, with respect, Mr. President, talking about where someone else drew the line is one thing. This is, I believe it has Senator Beck at the top of this proposal.
It does.
So you are drawing the line, Mr. President. I'm wondering about the senator's thinking about eliminating women who are not in the third trimester of pregnancy.
I would just remind the senator that you shouldn't use the word you, and you should be speaking to the president.
Absolutely. If I might, Mr. President, I'm wondering if the senator can tell me his thinking, given that this is his amendment at this point rather than the governor's.
I think this is a reasonable landing point. I think it could be expanded. I think it could be further restricted. But I think this is a reasonable landing spot to take care of our very most vulnerable in this state.
I think we have senators on the floor who have given birth. I don't know that they would share the adjective reasonable. With that said, does the senator also believe it's reasonable to exclude veterans and force them out of the hotel motel program?
My understanding is that many of our veterans that struggle with housing insecurity would be captured by these other criteria.
But many is not all.
That is true.
So is it reasonable to put some veterans on the street?
I think we are not placing people based on their veteran status, but more on what their status is as it intersects with this list right here.
But in other words, Mr. President, we are not protecting them based on their veteran status. I believe there's a proposal circulating to eliminate taxation on military pensions. And the sole reason for that is that those people have served and deserve our respect. Do they not deserve housing, Mr. President?
People that are fortunate enough to receive a military pension, while they are veterans, they do not represent all veterans. In fact, they only represent a very small percentage of veterans. So I think, we're not really talking about the same group of people here, but those people that are on military pensions, they would be subject to the same criteria here as any other veteran or non-veteran would be subject to.
Understood, Mr. President. That wasn't exactly the question. The question was, are not all veterans due the respect to retain housing if it's in the control of this body?
Well, I'd say clearly in this list of criteria, not all veterans meet that criteria. So we are not singling them out as a group. So I think the answer is no, we are not singling out all veterans to receive these motel priority eligibility. It is instead on a non-veteran status.
Understood, but to repeat, we are not protecting them as a group, veterans.
That's correct. We are not.
Okay. If I might move on to 3, subsection 3, requires a life-saving device that requires access to electricity. So if the life-saving device has a cord that plugs in, someone is preferred. If their life-saving device does not have a cord, they are to be exited. Is that reasonable in your way of thinking?
I think you make a point there that this only it is specific to those devices that require electricity that could obviously be provided by a motel room per se that has electricity. But if it's a life-saving device that does not need electricity, then the motel room isn't essential to having electricity. I mean, the life-saving device would work in the motel room. It would also work outside the motel room.
But having housing is often central to life-saving for that person. If I might ask about 4, someone is prioritized here or protected for 3 months, is in active cancer treatment or treatment for severe kidney disease or renal disease, or has severe liver or heart conditions. Those are conditions resulting from 3 or 4 different maladies, but obviously we could all think of a whole host of other equally serious medical conditions who were not covered. What was the thinking about privileging folks with cancer treatment as opposed to many other terminal illnesses?
The thinking was that the one to draw the list, the other option is just to say anybody with any medical condition. And this is where the list was drawn. There's some severe ailments that people suffer from and require treatment for. And the line was drawn here.
And as the senator said, it was the governor drawing the line. I would just repeat, the senator has brought this language in under his name. So the senator is in fact drawing the same line. Anyone who votes for this is drawing that line. I thank the senator. Mr. President, my point is that the budget adjustment currently protects everybody. For that 3-month period, everyone is protected. It's in a fully legal manner. So the distinctions that I just tried to point out, I have called absurd. I will call them absurd again. They are absurd and they are life-threatening. So I would hope that I could count on senators in the chamber to vote this amendment down and go with the BAA, which we passed on second reading yesterday, unamended. I will just add that if we were to vote this up, the amendment, it would need to travel back to the House, back to the chamber. The minority party has chosen not to suspend rules in either chamber, and as a result, they have made sure that the clock ran on these people being exited from the program. That will continue every day and accelerate every day. So sending it back to the House is also voting to delay by a week or more, maybe 2 weeks, the ability for the governor to have a look at this. So I would think, and I will just let the body know, if this passes unamended, I will ask to suspend the rules to accelerate the process to send it to the governor. So fair warning on that point. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to ask my colleagues not to support this amendment. And with all due respect for my seatmate, sort of, who I spend the entire day sitting across from in committee, I ask that you not support this because it negates the decisions of the legislature. And I will always, as a senator, and ask all of you to do the same, always defend our branch of government. And what this amendment does is basically capitulates to the governor's unconstitutional executive order. As was read yesterday on the floor, and if I may just quote from the letter from our own legislative counsel.
Without objection.
The executive order directly and intentionally conflicts with the actions of the legislature in favor of the governor's policy preference. The governor's attempt to circumvent the intent of the General Assembly is unconstitutional encroachment on a core function of the legislature. We are the legislature. We are the legislative branch. And this amendment would codify an unconstitutional executive order by the governor. And so I'm not going to make the policy arguments. My colleagues from the Chittenden districts, South and Central, have made excellent policy arguments for why we should defeat this amendment, and I agree with those. But I will make a constitutional argument and an argument that defends our branch of the legislature. We have, the founders created a really quite elegant system of 3 co-equal branches, separation of powers, and checks and balances that we use as branches of government to check each other. The governor can veto, and he has used that check frequently to check us. And we have overridden, and we have used that in the past few years frequently to check him. That is how our separation of powers works. But if we, as the legislative branch, simply capitulates and codifies an unconstitutional executive order, then we are not doing our duty as the legislative branch. And I think that now, more than ever, it is incredibly important that Vermonters, and I will say Americans, see us defending the legislative branch. Because it is no secret what is happening at the federal government. And as the senator from Chittenden Central said yesterday, I will not equate what the governor did with what our president is doing, but it is reminiscent of what is happening at the federal level, where we have a president who is skirting around the duties and the authorities of the Congress, of the legislative branch, and using unconstitutional executive orders to make policy, to go around one of the branches of government. And I want to call your attention to something that happened 2 days ago that was really heartening to me. And I texted a few of you and said, watch what's happening right now. There was a 25-hour filibuster by Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey talking about standing up for his branch of the government. His branch of the government is our branch of the government. We are senators too. He was standing up and saying, no, Mr. President, not anymore. I am going to hold the floor and I'm going to defend the Congress and our actions in our branch of government. And I'm also going to defend Americans and our safety. And I encourage you all to watch it, regardless of party. It is a stunning and historic defense of our three-party system. And Senator Booker, in a really lovely moment, talked about his favorite Federalist paper. And for those of us who are government nerds, and I'm sure there are several of them on the floor.
Senator, what is your point of order?
President, I believe the question is whether this amendment should be adopted.
No, we don't have those. Just check. It's a history lesson.
Senator from Caledonia, your point of order is not well taken, but I will remind the senator from Addison what the question is. It is, shall the Senate propose to the House to amend the bill as offered by the senator from Caledonia? And you have been straying a bit beyond
Okay.
that question.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I will conclude by, may I quote the Federalist paper 51?
As long as it's related and not too long.
It is just the original, the first lead-in to it, because the Federalist Paper number 51, which is Senator Booker's favorite Federalist paper, is one of many Federalist papers written by Hamilton and Madison that talk about separation of powers. And it leads in by saying, to what expedient then shall we finally resort for maintaining in practice the necessary partition of power among the several departments as laid down in the Constitution? The only answer that can be given is that as all these exterior provisions are found to be inadequate, the defect must be supplied by so contriving the interior structure of the government as that is its several constituent parts may, by their mutual relations, be the means of keeping each other in their proper places. What we are doing today, Mr. President, by voting down this amendment, is keeping the executive branch in its proper place and standing up for the legislative branch. So I ask, Mr. President, that when we vote on this, we vote by roll, and that I ask my fellow senators to defend our branch of government and not codify an illegal executive order by the governor. Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from Addison has requested that when the vote be taken, it be taken by roll. Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wonder if I might inquire of the presenter of the amendment.
The presenter of the amendment is interrogated.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would never want to try to predict what the governor might or might not do, but one concern I do have is that this BAA, absent your amendment, likely would face the veto pen only because this governor has vetoed so many bills. And my concern there really builds on the comments from the senator from Addison just now, which is looking at a calendar where if this does get vetoed, and that could be another few days without rule suspension, and then more time for another bill to come through to address this concern. I'm also seeing on one of those social media platforms quite a lot of feedback really opposed to what the governor has done, not necessarily because it hasn't gone far enough, as some would say, but that it did anything at all to extend this program. So my question to the senator who's presenting this amendment is part of the rationale for this amendment in order to prevent a court action that might challenge the legitimacy, the constitutional grounding of the executive order and win, and thus ultimately ejecting from the homes these families with children and medically vulnerable individuals, thus negating the executive order that's currently allowing them some continued reprieve.
Thank you for the question. I think this amendment is a good faith effort to get to a position where a limited group of people will be given priority status and get a bill to the governor that he can sign.
I would just remind the senators that we are not supposed to question motives.
Did I do that?
I didn't think, well,
Just reminding you.
I'm good.
I was asking about the intent. Fair enough. Yep, I'm still learning. Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the senator's response. Thank you. So, Mr. President, I will be voting in support of this amendment. I think that it does move the conversation forward, and I would hope that if it does pass, that we would suspend rules and that we would get this bill to the governor to sign. Some of you may have noticed I did vote against the first round of the Budget Adjustment Act. It's because, in many senses, I agreed with the governor. I agreed with the governor on frugal points.
Senator from Windsor, what is your point of order?
I believe the senator is attempting to persuade the body by using the executive branch and the governor as an influencing point of our debate. And I believe that's in violation of Mason's rules
Thank you. That's also news to me.
and Senate rules.
Should not be no, there should not be conversation between senators, though, you should remain standing. Senator, your point of order is not well taken, and the senator may continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was pretty much done. I'm going to read those Mason rules again right after this. So I just want to say that I will be voting for this amendment, and I do hope that the rule suspension order or request would still occur, because I do want to protect those families that have been included in the executive order, which I do see this amendment as doing something to that regard. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the presenter of the amendment?
The presenter of the amendment is interrogated.
Thank you. Did you inquire of any of the municipalities of the cost?
Senator, I would remind you that we don't use you in the Senate. You are supposed to ask the question of the president, so it's never personal.
So how am I supposed to address the president?
You would say, Mr. President, does the proposer of the bill intend, does the senator intend?
Mr. President, did the senator inquire of any municipalities of the cost to them of this amendment?
I did. I spoke actually more than just municipality. I spoke to, in my 3-county region, which I only, well, the people let's frame this, oftentimes we don't have a 1-county system way of doing things in the Northeast Kingdom. We have a multi-county way of doing things because of the population sparsity. But I did inquire of a municipality, but more importantly, I inquired of the group that's responsible for our people that are housing insecure. And they indicated to me that there were 7 people yesterday that were going to be exiting from the motel program. 4 of them, they had a housing plan for them, thank goodness. 2 of them, they had shelter beds available for them. And the last, which was in the northern part of the county, they were still trying to nail down. I would point out that none of those 7 households were there any children involved. All the households that had children were being allowed to remain in the motel program, either because they hadn't hit 80 days or they fell within one of these groups. So there would be no cost.
Mr. President, did the senator inquire of any municipalities who have experienced increases in their rates of unhoused individuals due to people being exited from the hotel program?
I did communicate with municipalities, but their answer was, and kind of consistent with what the Community Action Agency said, was they were not seeing any problems yesterday because those 7 households were taken care of.
Mr. President, did the senator inquire of communities like Burlington or communities like Rutland or communities like Barry, where there is a large population and a large percentage of the individuals who are unhoused end up going?
I did not inquire of any agencies or municipalities outside of my 3-county area.
Okay. I'm trying to understand some of the, further understand some of the points in the amendment. In one of the points where it says is in active cancer treatment, if someone finished their chemotherapy today and was still very ill because of the side effects of that chemotherapy, but technically not still in treatment, would they be exited under this amendment?
My understanding is that they would be included. Active would not mean the day you receive treatment. It's a longer struggle than that for most cancer patients that I've been familiar with over the years.
But would it include someone whose treatment had ended, but the side effects are long-lasting, perhaps lifelong, because of that treatment, and they are still completely incapacitated due to it?
I believe it would.
Would this include individuals who have life-saving medication that needs to be refrigerated but doesn't in fact itself have a cord?
I think that would fall, life-saving device, I think I think that would probably be included. Maybe it might be a gray area that somebody would have to figure out, but in my just reasonable interpretation, that would be included.
I thank the senator. This amendment and policy has been framed as cost-saving and humanitarian to protect some people. It's neither. The legislature allowed hundreds of people to be exited from the hotel motel program last year, and since then, the city of Burlington alone has spent over $8 million responding to the humanitarian crisis that created, costs that are borne by the taxpayers. That doesn't even include the increased costs to the education system, the healthcare system, the emergency response system, and more. And all of these higher costs are borne by the taxpayer. This is significantly more expensive than the no money to extend the program that we are asking for, and is just not fiscally responsible. Further, every person experiencing homelessness is vulnerable. People are dying. They are losing their fingers and toes. They are destabilized in our school system and living in constant fear about whether or not their life stability will be ripped out from under them. And that is barbaric. And therefore, I ask you to vote no on this amendment.
Senator from Windham.
Thank you. Mr. President, as with many things in my life, I'm mildly confused and a little concerned. I have a few questions. May I interrogate the presenter?
Presenter of the amendment is interrogated.
So I first just want to clarify or confirm that the policies described, the substantive policies described in the amendment are identical to what was issued in the executive order. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
So is it correct to say that the changes are to the deadline and the parameters for who is eligible for the cold weather exemption?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Just the general impact of whether it's the executive order or the amendment, is the general impact a change to the deadline and to the parameters for who is eligible for the cold weather exemption?
The change is an additional 3-month period for people that are in these categories that are prioritized, that they would move to the head of the line. And if they used days during that 3-month window, they would not, those days would not count towards their annual 80-day restriction. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
You did, thank you.
Okay.
So that's clear enough. What I would like to know is, if that is the case, is it also correct to say that the executive order was an exercise of discretion in how to spend funds and a change to policy?
Senator from Caledonia, I'm going to remind you as well, the words you and your, which you've recently uttered, are not appropriate in the Senate. So please be a little more attentive to your responses.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that reminder. And you broke my train of thought, so if I could ask the senator from Windham to repeat that question.
And that is the proper way to ask the question.
Of course. The question was the executive order an exercise of discretion in how to spend funds and a change to policy?
I believe there is no money associated with this. It is a policy change, and so I think I would respond by saying this was just a policy policy change, a policy proposal in the executive order from the governor.
I thank the member. Mr. President, there are either two possibilities in my opinion. Either the executive order was lawful and therefore this amendment would be moot, or it was unlawful and oversteps into the realm of lawmaking. Regardless of which is true, I will be voting no, though it is my opinion that it does overstep into the realm of lawmaking. And as we just heard, it was a policy change. The executive branch cannot do that. If it's the direction of this body to concede our lawmaking responsibility to another branch, and then debate bills and amendments that retroactively bring those executive orders into conformity with law, then I would ask, why are we here? So this is not a small issue. The rule of law and respect for the Constitution does not get swept away in one broad stroke, but rather it occurs through the death of 1,000 cuts. It occurs when any branch of government, not just the executive, starts to lose discipline when it comes to not just their responsibilities, but also staying within their lane. Voting yes on what might seem like a harmless amendment or a helpful amendment actually establishes a dangerous precedent for future governors and legislators. We do not just represent our constituents from our respective districts, we also represent the Vermont legislature, a separate and equal branch of government. The U.S. Constitution and the Vermont Constitution clearly establish that lawmaking is an exclusively legislative responsibility, and that responsibility must remain within the Senate and the other body. I ask everyone to vote no on the amendment.
Senator from Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we've heard a great deal about the governor's intent through his executive order, and we've heard about our long history of at least 5 years of our legislative intent in developing policy. We've heard that we should adopt this amendment and move forward. It's a step backwards, a huge step backwards. We've heard that we should be careful and vote for this amendment out of fear of a veto or a lawsuit. That's a huge step backwards. We should not do that. Mr. President, legislative intent is well documented in Act 113, Act 141, H489, and other laws that we have passed relative to general assistance and to our helping people find a more permanent home. We cannot legislate by fear. We cannot step backwards. We cannot allow for the executive branch to co-opt legislative work and make policies in this area. We've heard that very clearly from a number of us. I will sit down now, but I ask you all to vote no on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Are you ready for the question? Senator from Madison.
Yes, Mr. President, may I interrogate the presenter of the amendment?
The presenter of the amendment is interrogated.
Thank you, Mr. President. When people come to us for amendment, does it matter who that person is? If you have a constituent that comes and asks you to make an amendment?
No. I think
Is not our governor a citizen, and this is the question for the presenter, Mr. President. Is the governor a citizen of Vermont?
He is.
Shouldn't a citizen, whether it be a senator, a representative, a judge, be able to come to their senator, representative, and ask for an amendment? We may see this language already, but the day that we as citizens, we're citizens of Vermont first, before we're senators, representatives, police officers, whatever your civil duty is. And the day that we cannot come to one of our senators, representatives, and ask for an amendment like this is really the day that this government is starting to fold. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Are you ready for the question? Senator from Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wrote something at the top of my notes based on some of what I've heard in this discussion. Without fear or favor of any person. This chamber and everyone in it swore an oath to the Constitution and the people of Vermont to uphold their rights and responsibilities without fear or favor of any person. Mr. President, much of this debate has centered around the thinking of, the whims of, and the actions of one person. So when we have a conversation about whether or not any citizen should be able to come to us, I would ask that we still be worthy of our office and focus on our own beliefs, our own amalgamation of our conscience, our constituency, and our commitment to each other, rather than rely on the argumentation that this was a request from a constituent, a request from the governor of the state of Vermont. Our job is to operate without fear or favor of any person. Mr. President, I actually want to first correct a statement and a perspective that I myself have shared in this body. And that is that this, as it is currently in place, a failed program. Mr. President, when the pandemic hit, on top of a recession and a tropical storm and another recession and much uncertainty in our economy and our state, we really welcomed this notion that we would not leave anyone vulnerable because they have flu-like symptoms or because it's not a safe time to sleep outside, that we welcome that we would be sheltering them. And then over time, we started to have grave concerns about the cost. We had an administration that was paying well above what we might consider a reasonable amount for a Hampton Inn in Colchester at $180 or $200 a night in the shoulder season. And we started to ask, are we using these limited units to the best of our ability? Are there families sleeping in their car while someone else has a room who could do more or better or has other options? We asked fair questions about this program. And then we negotiated in good faith with the executive branch to bring the cost of those nights down and to focus on the most vulnerable people in our state getting access to a place to lay their head and take care of themselves and their families. And now, in a Friday afternoon rewrite of our intent and who counts as vulnerable or not, one person has made those decisions, maybe with their staff, maybe with the input of people who are impacted, but we don't know, because that's our job in the legislative branch of government, to write our policies and write our laws with the input of all citizens and in the light of day. So that, Mr. President, we would know, are we exiting veterans who are 100% disabled but don't need to plug something in to stay alive? Are we exiting widows because they're not getting cancer treatment, but they simply lost a spouse? And that's not good enough anymore because someone decided it wasn't on a Friday afternoon. That's what we're doing here. And that's frankly irresponsible, Mr. President. And so when I hear colleagues say, let's move on to more pressing matters, let's do what's reasonable, I take serious issue with that. And it does make me concerned about doing our jobs and doing them to the best of our ability and keeping in mind what we are here to do. People know that I will never miss an opportunity to talk about housing. I'll talk about pregnancy later, but right now I'm going to talk about housing. It costs about $600,000 to create a unit of housing right now. We have gotten this program to a place where we are housing Vermonters who are vulnerable for between $30,000 and $40,000. $80 a night. That's $30,000 and $40,000 if they were housed by this program for an entire year. But $80 a night. There is nothing we can do in this housing emergency to keep people safe and housed that costs any less than that. And instead, we are giving a responsibility that is uniquely ours and most efficient when we do it as a state, and devolving it to our beleaguered and overburdened municipalities, shelter systems, hospitals, etc., at greater cost. So when we talk about what's reasonable, Mr. President, I hope we remember that we are talking about what's moral and responsible, but also what's cost effective and best for our taxpayers. And that is not what this is. Now I'd like to get to the conversation about who we are exiting and why some people think that it is only important that we keep families with children housed and women in their third trimester of pregnancy, but not their first or their second. And cancer patients, but not victims of domestic violence. Mr. President, I'll start with victims of domestic violence. I answered the shelter phone in the middle of the night for Steps to End Domestic Violence as one of my first jobs as the legal director of that nonprofit. And I challenge anyone who has someone in their lives who's a victim of domestic violence or not, to think about the vulnerability you feel when you walk out the door on someone who might have access to guns, on someone who has threatened you harm, and you start asking around for a place to lay your head and maybe bring your kids with you. But maybe not. Maybe if you have kids, you have a motel room. But otherwise, you have to figure out where you are going to sleep and how you are going to meet your basic needs if you are no longer under the control of someone who has been abusive to you. And now we have an amendment that says that's not a priority. We're not as worried about that anymore. Mr. President, the second group of people I want to talk about are pregnant people, people who have given birth or plan to in their future can probably relate or at least understand what I'm about to say. Maybe, I think, as the most recent person to give birth, thankfully not in this chamber, but very close. Mr. President, it's hard for me to stand here and try to put this into words knowing that those who vote against this amendment and for pregnant women in all stages of pregnancy, the people who vote against this amendment will be both men and women, will be both people who have been pregnant, can get pregnant, and those who support them and understand that that's an incredibly delicate time for their health and their well-being and their mental health and well-being as well. And Mr. President, I don't believe I would be wrong that based on past votes, that every person who votes for this amendment and decides when a woman can be exited from the motel program who's pregnant is not going to be pregnant in their lives. And that scares me, Mr. President. I personally haven't wanted to think about gender and about different lived experiences in a lot of our debates. But this one scares me. We've heard a little bit about what it's like to be in your first trimester of pregnancy, so I won't trot over that ground again. But that leads me to the third category of people that I'd like to talk about with this specific provision. And that is unborn children, Mr. President. Because when you hit 20 weeks pregnant, you finally think, wow, I've made it over a lot of the hurdles that I'm gonna have to get through to make sure this child is born with all their fingers and toes and brain hemispheres and chambers of their heart intact. And before 20 weeks, that is the most risk you face in giving birth to a child that didn't get the safety and protection they needed. That is when you are at risk of losing a child that you want. And you're going to tell people who are 15 weeks pregnant, come back. Come back when you're at 28 weeks. People took issue with me on Friday.
Clarification.
What is your point of
The
clarification?
amendment being discussed, I'll read it. In the third trimester of pregnancy, or who will enter the third trimester of pregnancy between April 1st and June 30th. So a woman that is 15 months.
15 weeks, Mr. President.
15 weeks pregnant right now would certainly enter the third trimester between April 1st and June 30th. Thank you, Mr. President.
You should remain standing.
Senator from Caledonia, a point of clarification is not really a legal point. There can be a parliamentary inquiry or a point of order. So for your clarification, it would be suggested that you wait till the senator from Chittenden is done and then could make your clarification at that time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that is a very relevant final note to end on. Everyone who votes for this amendment, those who likely drafted this amendment on this language, I should say, on Friday afternoon, do not know what it's like to be 15 weeks pregnant or 28 weeks pregnant Or how many weeks, perhaps, are in between? And that, Mr. President, is of great concern to me and should be of great concern to all of us. Because we should be able to stand by our work and tell Vermonters that we did right by them without fear or favor of any person. And that is not what this amendment represents.
Are you ready for the question? Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the pro tem in his interrogation asking about veterans. When I was in ROTC, a good sergeant major gave me a mantra: leave no one behind. When the pro tem asked, will there be veterans that will be left behind? The answer was affirmative. Because of some criteria. I have supported veterans and legislation for veterans many times against my own party. Because I believe that veterans should be protected because they protected us. The number 22 keeps ringing in my head. 22 veterans per day commit suicide. I do not want to be the one to jettison them from housing and have them feel they have no other choice but to commit suicide. I will not do that. And I implore my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, many who are veterans, if that were to happen, when they lay their heads down at night, how will they feel? I will leave no one behind. Thank you, Mr. President.
Are you ready for the question? The question is, shall the Senate propose to the House to amend the bill as offered by the senator from Caledonia? Are you ready for the question? If so, the secretary will call the roll.
Mr. President, could I ask that you restate the question?
The question is, shall the Senate propose to the House to amend the bill as offered by the senator from Caledonia?
Senator Baruth.
No.
Senator Beck.
Yes.
Senator Saunders.
No.
Senator Brennan.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
No.
Senator Collmore.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
No.
Senator Douglas.
Yes.
Senator Bueller.
No.
Senator Hardy.
No.
Senator Harrison.
No.
Senator Hart.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
No.
Senator Heffernan.
Yay.
Senator Ingalls.
Yes.
Senator Lyons.
No.
Senator Major.
No.
Senator Matos.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
Yes.
Senator Kershaw.
No.
Senator Plunkett.
No.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
No.
Senator Bohosky.
No.
Senator Watson.
No.
Senator Weeks.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Senator White.
No.
Senator Williams.
Yes.
The ayes voting 14, the nays voting 16, and the amendment has failed. The question now is, are there any other amendments? Bill shall be read a third time.
H 489, an act relating to fiscal year 2025 budget adjustments.
The question is, shall the bill pass?
Roll call.
Roll call has been requested. When the vote is taken, it will be taken by roll. Are you ready for the question? If so, the secretary will call the roll.
Senator Haroo.
Yes.
Senator Beck.
No.
Senator Bungard.
Yes.
Senator Brennan.
No.
Senator Brock.
No.
Senator Chittenden.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Caldwell.
No.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Douglas.
No.
Senator Gulick.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hart.
No.
Senator Hashimi.
Yes.
Senator Heffernan.
Nay.
Senator Ingalls.
No.
Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator Major.
Yes.
Senator Mather.
No.
Senator Norris.
No.
Senator Pershman.
Yes.
Senator Plunkett.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Zahoski.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
No.
Senator Westman.
No.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
No.
The yeas voting 17, the nays voting 13, and you have passed H 489.
Mr. President,
Senator from Chittenden.
if I might, I would move, as I suggested earlier, that the Senate suspend its rules and move this bill to the House forthwith.
The senator from Chittenden has moved that the Senate suspend its rules and message our actions on H 489 to the governor.
The House.
It has to go back to the House? To the House forthwith. Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Ayes have it, and we have messaged our actions on H 489 to the House forthwith. Senator from Chittenden.
One final motion, and I thank the body for that vote. I now move that the bill be ordered to the governor per Joint Rule 15.
The senator from Chittenden has moved that the bill be ordered to the governor per Joint Rule 15. Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. The senator from Essex.
Clarification, Mr. President, on what that rule is.
Senator from Essex, this would, after a bill has passed both houses, before being delivered to the governor for approval, it shall remain for one legislative day in the files of the clerk of the House in which it originated, unless either the House shall otherwise order or the governor shall sooner request. So if we did not pass this, it would go over to the House and remain there one more day before moving on to the governor.
And Mr. President, if I might explain.
Senator from Chittenden.
I thank the body for suspending the rules. I see this as a way to get this on its way as expeditiously as possible. It doesn't really make sense to suspend the rules and then not go the further step and remove the day in the House. So that's why I followed up with this motion, Mr. President.
Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And we have what? We have ordered delivery of the bill to the governor. That completes the orders of the day. Senator from Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pending announcements, I would move that the Senate stand in adjournment until 11:30 a.m., Friday, April 4th. If I might begin announcements, I just wanted to say to the chamber that was a heartfelt, complicated, and difficult discussion. I felt it was conducted fully within the rules. I wanted to thank Mr. President for keeping us within those guidelines, and I think it bodes well for how we will handle difficult issues that are coming our way yet. Thank you.
Are there any announcements? Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Appropriations will meet at 2:30.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance will meet at the fall of the gavel. We have witnesses waiting.
Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the senator from Washington just said, we also have witnesses waiting, so government operations will meet immediately after the fall of the gavel.
Senator from Windham.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate institutions will meet at 2:30.
Senator from Bennington.
Mr. President, the Senate Education Committee will meet at 2:30.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, the senator from Chittenden Central has moved that we adjourn until 11:30 a.m. Friday, April 4th, 2025. Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we've adjourned till 11:30 a.m., April 4th, 2025.